Welcome to the Affirming Village podcast, where we center neurodivergent voices, affirm diverse ways of being, and empower families, educators, and advocates with knowledge that truly honors the whole learner. We're your co-hosts, Dr. Destiny Huff, a late diagnosed autistic ADHD mental health therapist and non-attorney special education advocate, and Lisa Baskin-Wright, an ADHD and dyslexic educator and IEP coach. Together, we dig into conversations about neuroaffirming practices, special education, and disability rights. Please remember, nothing shared on this podcast is medical or legal advice, and the views shared here by the host and the guest are their personal opinions. This space is for educational purposes only, to help you feel informed, empowered, and never alone in the village. Welcome back to the Affirming Village. I'm Dr. Destiny Huff, and today we're talking about one of the biggest mindset shifts in special education, moving from compliance to collaboration.
And I'm Lisa Baskin-Wright. So many IEP teams get stuck in that compliance loop of checking boxes and meeting deadlines and following the process, but missing the heart of it all, the learner and their relationships.
Yes. When the focus becomes, did we follow the rule, instead of, is this helping the student thrive and making them feel safe and supported, we lose sight of what an IEP is really supposed to be, a living, breathing plan for a learner's success.
Exactly. So today we're unpacking what it looks like to build IEP teams that lead with connection, trust, and shared purpose instead of fear and formality.
We'll talk about practical ways to shift your language, your mindset, and your meeting culture, so collaboration becomes the default, not the exception.
Because when we center relationships, we create space for honesty, creativity, and true partnership. That's when the magic happens for learners, families, and educators alike.
So if you've ever left an IEP meeting feeling like it was all compliance and no compassion, this episode is for you.
So let's reimagine what's possible when we bring humanity back to the table.
All right, so let's dive in, because this is a big piece, I feel, of what really separates your traditional IEPs and traditional advocacy when it comes to compliance versus a neuroaffirming approach. And I want to be clear, when we're talking about compliance here, yes, we are talking about following those guidelines, those policies and procedures in IDEA, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. But we're also talking about shifting from making sure you're just checking that box and therefore excluding the family, excluding that meaningful parent input, and not looking at the learner's needs, and making sure that you're incorporating all of that while you are complying with the policies and procedures.
Yes, absolutely. I think that that's a perfect way to describe it, right? Because in sort of traditional advocacy, and we see this with attorneys too, they're focused on the procedural side of things. And I think what's unique about how Destiny and I and other neurodiversity affirming advocates approach this is that we're really centered on the learner and the learner's experience, and creating a space at the IEP table where everyone feels safe to get curious about that learner and not feel the pressure of, am I doing this right? Am I saying it the right way? Am I checking all the boxes? And it's not that we're throwing procedure out the window. It's just, you could write something in the right place and do it in the right order, but if it's not at all in alignment with who this learner is and what they need, and it's, really heavily focused on their compliance, you're going to have a garbage program. And we're going to be back at that table very quickly.
No, but that's absolutely correct. And I think for me as an advocate, one of the places where I see this very heavily is when it comes to an annual IEP meeting, right? Because, and I always prep my families when we get ready to have, so for those of you that don't know or that are new to it, whenever your learner becomes eligible for special education, that date typically is going to become the date of their annual IEP. That is where legally, and we are not attorneys, that the school team is required to hold a meeting, go through every section of your learner's IEP, see if anything needs to be updated, adjusted, or changed. And then, that becomes their IEP for the following, for that, either that current school year or following school year, based on when the date is, right? And so a lot of times what I'll see is that, one, parents don't know you can request an IEP meeting at any time. But two, because the school does have boxes they have to check, they do have to go through and update the parent input section, and the present levels and the goals and the accommodations and the services, that the school will already have this agenda in mind of what they're going to do. And the parent, a lot of time, again, going back to my parents that don't know they can request an IEP meeting at any time, think this is the only time I can air out my grievances, right? This is the only time I can say what supports my learner, what doesn't support my learner, what I'm noticing. And so the parents come in there with one thing in mind, the school team comes in there with another thing in mind, and we're not really centering the learner so much as we are checking boxes.
Yes, absolutely. And this is making me think, if you have not had an opportunity to listen to what I believe was episode 6, the parent input, that would be a good place to go back, like press pause here and go back, listen there, because we talked a lot about sort of the who, what, where, when, why of parent input. And I think that really ties into what Destiny just said, especially at an annual meeting where there are procedural things that have to be done. That if there hasn't been communication ahead of time, if there hasn't been sort of some front loading of the team, of the things that you want to be able to discuss, if you have an ask that you want to make, maybe it's an assessment or a change of placement or a change in service or whatever it may be, if that hasn't happened ahead of time, you're most likely going to feel frustrated because they're coming in going, okay, Destiny, tell us a little bit about your learner's strengths. And you're like, oh my God, this part again, right? Like, I'm sorry, am I projecting? It just can feel like a broken record. But, you're holding on to this, like, I really need to talk about fill in the blank. And they're going through the motions. And some of it, to me, it's a little bit of a balance, right? Of understanding what those procedures are and what that timing is. Because I know I shared this in a previous episode. I was just so hyper-focused on the service and placement side of things that I was like, yeah. Goals, schmoles, whatever. Like, can we get to the stuff that actually like informs my daughter's experience? Not realizing that all the things before very much so inform her experience. And so parents sometimes come in with, like a level of, like a sense of urgency. I've got to be able to talk about whatever. And the team is starting off with, tell us a little bit about how great your child is. And you're just like, nobody can see on YouTube, you can see my face. Like, right? It feels like this sort of procedural, not meaningless, but like just frustrating process.
I think what you're alluding to is that it feels like a song and dance, right? That saying where it's like, this is what we do, right? So it's like, every year I'm going to come in, and the school team's like, we need to update all of this information. And then, because we haven't done it in a year, and the parent is coming in and they're going to say these things, but I'm going to have these, positive things, but also points of contention that need to be discussed. And we're not going to have enough time. And then I'm going to leave frustrated, then they might get frustrated because we only have so much time and we need to check boxes. It's a song and dance, right?
Yeah.
And when we talk about this collaboration piece, right, what we're talking about moving from compliance to collaboration is, and moving to connection is, not doing that song and dance. And part of not doing that song and dance takes place really outside of the IEP meeting.
Yes.
It takes place through that communication throughout the school year. It takes place with those parent teacher conferences. It takes place with, those emails back and forth about where you're seeing issues or concerns or communication logs. So part of building that and going into a successful, IEP meeting that is collaborative. And to me, a successful IEP meeting is one that is collaborative where things actually get resolved and a plan is actually created, is having that continued communication.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that, there's times I'm laughing because I'm about to say something and I know you're going to start laughing at me. It's nuanced.
That's your catchphrase. I'm pretty sure
that and curiosity, those two things are very much so my words. But like, as folks are having to go through the motions of like the procedural side of things, there would be times where like, I'm trying to think of a concrete example, and of course I'm drawing a blank, but like, where I've got a question about something, or I want to hear more from a particular person at the table or whatever. And I may say, I know I'm a little bit putting the cart before the horse, but I am really curious to hear from classroom teacher, special ed teacher, speech language pathologist, whomever, fill in the blank, your thoughts on, fill in the blank. Or, obviously I really am a big proponent of like front loading ahead of time. So that communication piece being really key. And that, it makes some of the procedural side of things feel less performative and more meaningful. Right. So like I've had teams say, for example, they have to give an opportunity to like go around the table to hear more than just from the parents, but from all the professionals that work with the learner, their perception of the learner's strengths or their concerns that they may have about the learner. And so you submitting a parent input statement ahead of time isn't going to stop that procedure from taking place. But it is going to set the foundation for a collaboration because I'm sharing information with you ahead of time. But it also kind of sets the tone in the room of like, this is how we talk about my child.
Yeah, no. And I think, and you're talking about, and I want to kind of distinguish between this for families. When you're talking about the parent input statement, right? We're talking about that parents' input about their learner. And as Lisa and I have said, we did an episode on this, getting into the weeds of that. But the parent input statement is your telling the school team your perception of your learner, their needs, what supports them, the barriers and challenges that they face, and what you're seeing that may need to be adapted or adjusted in the environment to support them.
Right.
Now, the other side of that is what, I like to call your parent concern letter, or your parent input letter. And I mainly call it a parent a lot of times I call it a parent concern letter because usually there's concerns. But if there's just giving input on something that's going on, I call it a parent input letter. And for me, that is looking at the issues and barriers and challenges that you're seeing or the areas you want more communication on. And so what that is that, I draft for my families is basically if we're concerned about how they're getting their special education services, or if we're concerned about their accommodations, or we're concerned about the reading program for their dyslexic learner, we draft this letter and it essentially is saying, can you answer these questions, clarify these things for us? And so for me, again, just to go back to distinguish, that parent input statement is talking about your learner, their strengths, their supports, their barriers, what you would like to see for them in their educational journey or during that educational year. The parent concern letter, parent input letter is saying, I would like more information on this. I have questions about this. I'm confused about this. And And I find that when Lisa talks about that front loading piece, right? So front loading is essentially doing that preparation and that work before something is supposed to come into play. And so sending that letter allows the school team, like I say, I don't want to waste my time or your time. And so that allows them to go, okay, when Mrs. Huff comes into this meeting, she's going to expect answers to these questions. She's going to expect the math teacher to talk about how the special education services have been going in math for her child. And so they make sure that those things get addressed and answered. And I've even seen school teams where they will use that as the basis to guide the meeting, because they're like, we know in order for this to be a collaborative process, we need to answer these questions. And so I think it's very important when you mention that front loading piece, that I tell all my parents, I had someone reach in my inbox and just say, I'm just trying to figure out how to effectively advocate for my child, and I have these concerns. What do you recommend I do prior to the meeting? And I said, send a letter. Send a letter. Give them the opportunity to get their ducks in a row when they step into that meeting.
Yeah, no, that's such an important distinction, right? So in my mind, the kind of parent input statement is going to be copied and pasted into the learner's IEP because it's a capture of them.
Right.
A parent concerns letter is not going to be copied and pasted into the IEP. It's essentially your input for the agenda.
Right. Right.
Like, these are the questions I have. These are the things that I need to discuss. And in my world, that parent concern letter, and I'm sure in yours as well, can mean more than one thing. It can be sort of informing the agenda of a meeting. It can also be, we've reached an impasse and I'm now going up kind of the chain of command. And so it looks a little bit different because there might be a timeline in there of like, tried XYZ, this is where we are, and then here's what we're seeking as resolution. So it's almost, it's like a dual concern letter / request for prior written notice, right? Like, yeah, I've got some requests in there.
Yeah. So for my families, their parent concern letter or parent input letter always at the bottom says, place this in Destiny Huff's special education file, place this in Destiny Huff's education.
Oh, yeah.
File. And it's always sent as an attachment
100%.
to an email. And sent with an email that says, please see letter attached. And yeah, it's absolutely, it has been, kind of guiding the agenda for the IEP meeting. It has been a timeline of events that have occurred up to now, which is why we are requesting an IEE, which is independent education evaluation, if you are familiar with that term, or a special education evaluation request, or requesting for a director to attend the meeting. But you're absolutely correct. The parent input statement is that parent input. So again, please go back and listen to our other episode because we get into the weeds of that. But that is that statement where we're wanting to get past those little 2 lines of, my child is great at math and I'm worried about social interactions. And we want to get to, this is how they communicate. This helps them regulate. This is where they need executive functioning support. This is what I'm hoping for them to accomplish this year. That's that piece that's copied and pasted in there. And then when we talk about these parent concern letters and parent input letters and things like that. And the way I distinguish, by the way, between an input letter and a concern letter is that sometimes my parents don't have concerns so much as they feel they're not getting information. So they have seen this very recently with a lot of my non-speaking learners, families coming to me that have a non-speaking learner, and they're like, I don't know about their day. And so we're not so much concerned as we're just saying, like, can you please create some type of communication so that we can know about their day? How are these things going? How are they progressing with this? Right. But they are not concerned, versus the concern letters are like, I have a concern that accommodations are not being followed or services are not being provided.
Right.
So very two, different things and approaches.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I'm just trying to think in the actual IEP meeting itself. I feel like I do kind of a lot of modeling of what collaboration looks like.
Agreed.
So, and every meeting is different, right? So I just had an experience with a family where there was a letter of concern written because there was a whole heap of things happening. And it was like, we need to have an emergency IEP meeting because what's up is down and what's down is thrown off to the side and we need to come together. But it just so happened that the learner's annual meeting was like 2.5 weeks later. And so one of the things that was really helpful, and I'm not suggesting you have to have a meeting every time you turn around, but one of the things that was really helpful was the meeting a few weeks ago was centered around parents' concerns.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
But it also gave us an opportunity to pre-plan for the annual. And so there were questions about the placement and is it the right placement for the learner? There were questions just like, well, what does the school day even look like? All these things. And one of the biggest concerns that the parent had was the IEP itself didn't read like her child. Mm-hmm. It was so the assessments that had been done a year earlier, they weren't a good capture.
Okay.
And, beautifully, the learner had made some really lovely and meaningful progress. And so it just was such a mismatch. Mm-hmm. But it had informed placement. And so it was like, is this the right place? It was it's a restrictive placement. Is this the right place? But during the concerns meeting, I'll call it, we were able to discuss, what would happen at the annual meeting. And so I was able to say, parents' top concern at this point is that the current IEP is such a poor snapshot of the learner. And so we don't really have a sense of their present levels in this environment because that hasn't been communicated. So we would like to open up the lines of communication between now and the meeting. And are you amenable to us today discussing some of the areas that we'd like to see goals in so that we can kind of come to a little bit of consensus there? But then are you open to us creating, or the parent creating, a shared Google Doc where we share ideas about goals so that you don't feel like we're coming in kind of telling you how to do the thing. But the parent doesn't feel like they're being surprised with stuff that feels out of alignment because the current program feels out of alignment. And so they were open, but we could have a conversation about it. And so I'm not suggesting that every annual meeting needs a pre-meeting, but some of that can happen because I've had other families where we do that via email. This is what we'd like to be able to do. Are you open to us creating, a shared Google file or whatever, or document? That's what I'm going for. And usually they have been. So then you're able to come into the meeting and they're able to say, okay, we read through, what you put, we've been able to incorporate some of it, right? And so we just had this annual meeting for this learner the other day, and everybody, we were able to talk about placement. The parent was able to explore some other options. They were able to collect more baseline data. We were able to have a more robust conversation. And the parent left feeling really good about the whole thing, which is fantastic because that's not how they were feeling a month and a half ago when they first reached out, because it was, like I said, everything was not in place. Nothing was in place is a probably more accurate way to say it. So some of that I think can be really, really helpful. And again, it can take many forms, but it's how are we sort of setting the terms for how we want to work together? And what feels supportive to you as a team and what feels like overstepping. And here's where the question is kind of coming from, so that you can have a understanding of why the parent might be feeling that sense of urgency or frustration or whatever it may be.
Absolutely. And I think, you lifted up several things. I think one, the modeling, the collaboration. I do feel like, and I'm just going to kind of put it in two categories. There's adversarial advocates and non-adversarial advocates. And I feel like when you're a non-adversarial advocate and your purpose is to bridge that collaboration and communication, you do spend time in the meeting modeling what that collaboration can look like, demonstrating how, both sides, again, if you're presuming that they're not coming from ill intent, both sides have something valuable they're trying to share and a goal they're trying to accomplish. It just might be that they're not trying to accomplish the same goal. And so it's important to bridge that. So that modeling piece is so important. The other thing is I found myself, where you mentioned about sending that letter, having the annual coming up, and then holding a different meeting. I've had some teams where we send the letter and then the team responds and they're like, hold up, like we only allotted this amount of time for an annual. And so they're like, and now we're seeing that there are these concerns that we want to address and talk through. So can we do A and then B, which a lot of times ends up having two meetings so that we can do the annual and check the boxes, that compliance piece, but also make sure in doing that, we're addressing your concerns in each of the areas that they apply to. And I love when that happens. I've also had teams that have just said, oh, wow, well, we would like to now move the meeting because we only set aside an hour. And we think 2 hours would be able to cover everything in one meeting. So can we now shift it to another date and time so that we have the 2 hours allotted to address it? So I think you brought up some really key pieces that are important for that collaboration piece. Another thing that comes to mind to me, though, when we're talking about facilitating that collaboration, is that a lot of times I will come across where parents have communicated with the school team when dysregulated and not concretely with their concerns. And so it feels like I've already said this to them many times in many ways, but there's no documentation. So again, we have an episode on that already where we discussed documentation. Yeah, I think it is episode 4, because I think episode 3 is the bias at the table.
Yes, that one's. Mm-hmm.
So episode 4, that I believe it is documentation. But where parents have not documented the concerns. And so because of that, I always tell them, yes, you're supporting your learner, you're advocating for your learner, you're looking out for your learner's needs and what that looks like in the environment. But you also do have to remember that the school team is theoretically looking out for the needs and supports of many learners. And so they might just be like misplacing the conversation that you had.
Right.
And
not go back and find it.
Right. And are not completely remembering the ins and outs of the conversation. And so part of that collaboration is why I like the letter, because it allows the parent to document what their concerns are and then have a place where the team can go and look at it and make sure they're understanding. But the other reason I like the letter is because, as I tell my families, if you've ever been in any job where email is used, at this point, everyone pretty much has. Things get lost in email because there's so many people included a lot of times. There's so much back and forth communication. And so then you're trying to go weed back in your email for when you made a certain request. Whereas when you have it all in this one letter concretely, and everyone can refer to that letter and reference that, it's different. So I also wanted to point back to that piece of just like making sure that documentation is there to refer back to have it in black and white so that everyone can read it and then discuss what is their interpretation of what they are reading. Because I can't tell you how many times, I'm sure you've had this too, Lisa, where you come to the table and it's really a misunderstanding and of something that has been read, or communicated, but nobody talked to the other one to clarify.
Right. No, absolutely. As you were talking, I had a related yet unrelated thought, which was in the meeting itself, I think a way that can kind of sort of slow down the process, and I don't mean like I'm trying to stall anybody, but like get us more centered on the learner and away from like, okay, we did present levels, now let's move into, right, where it just feels like we're kind of hustling through and turning the pages, is to ask some form of the question, what does that look like? It is my favorite question, or up there as one of my favorite questions to ask in an IEP meeting, right? Because it refocuses everybody on the learner. So it can be more broad, like, I don't really have a sense of their day. Could you walk me through a day in the life of Lisa as a kindergarten learner in your classroom, or whatever it may be, right? It could be, you know, if the team is lifting up in present levels, you know, an academic concern or a behavioral concern or whatever, asking you, okay, so they're having some, you know, difficulty, say in reading. Okay, well, what does that look like? What's happening for them during that time? What kind of curriculum's being used? Like, I'm just, you know, I'm curious. And I know we've talked about this before in terms of asking questions, but I think that, you know, you can even say I'm in part asking the question because I'm not there. And so I'm just trying to like have the picture painted for me so I can better understand. But also, I'm thinking about when we get to the goal section, and I'm thinking about when we get to the accommodation section, what might be really beneficial, or what I'm hearing is already happening, and I want to make sure it's being documented, right? So it's not that we're like flushing procedure, you know, to only have this collaboration. It's they're married. It's just what does that look like, and what does that look like sort of in practical terms when you're sitting in a meeting? Because I think that some of the angst that can happen for families is, it's obviously emotional. This is your learner. Like, full stop. But you, as the parent, I think you've said this in multiple episodes, and it's so true. Like, nobody does more research than the parent of a neurodivergent or disabled learner, right? So chances are there's been some thought, some effort, some, you know, blood, sweat, and tears that have gone into prep, even if it's just emotionally, you know, crying in the shower, or not sleeping if you're me and your bestie is insomnia. Like, you know, there's a lot of weight that I think parents feel entering into an IEP meeting, right? They built it up. And it's not that teams don't to a degree, but like you were saying, not in this episode, the last episode, we've recorded 2 episodes today, so they're blending in my brain. But you were talking about boundary setting, and that like for you having multiple IEP meetings in a day is like, it doesn't work. Well, a lot of school teams set it up where they have like, we only do IEPs on Tuesdays, right? So they're sitting in meetings all day long. I mean, how many IEP meetings have you been in where they're like, I'm so sorry, we have a hard stop at 1 because our next meeting starts at 1. Like, they're not giving these folks an opportunity to take a sip of water, a breath, a potty, a snack, a something, right? Like, they're just doom, ba-boom, ba-boom, ba-boom. And so when they're feeling like this pressure of like, we have 5 IEP meetings today and we've got to get through, right? We want to be cognizant of, respectful of that time, but we also want it to feel like there's meaningful conversation happening.
100%.
And so I think that the front loading piece of that is helpful, but I also think it's helpful to name or slow folks down a little. And again, I don't mean to like stall it out so we get to have 12 meetings for 1 annual. Like, I'm not trying to suggest that, but sometimes school teams don't realize that they're like on the treadmill because this is meeting 3 of 5 and meeting 2 was really terrible and there were tears and lots of curse words, and I'm still like emotionally trying to recover from meeting number 2. And I know that meeting number 5 is going to match meeting number 2. And like, I'm not feeling it, right? Like, I want to honor kind of their experience too.
Right.
But the parent has this one huge meeting.
Right.
And so how are we making sure that it's not just like, yep, check, do, bing, bang, right? Like, because that's what it can feel like. And even in like the meeting that I was referring to before, where we had the one and then the annual a couple weeks later, they were working on a tight time frame. And we did run like 10 minutes over. And the program specialist was late to their next meeting. But I think there'd been enough collaboration that had happened ahead of time and sharing of documents ahead of time that like the parent didn't leave feeling lousy when the program specialist kind of raced through the last couple of little things and was like, I'm so sorry to do this, but like, I'm late, right? And it was like, it's totally fine. We get it. Like the parent had texted me a question and I was like, yes, absolutely. And then the program, because I wasn't doing a good job paying attention to the clock, the program specialist was like, oh, I gotta go. And it was like, we can just email them, not a problem, right? Like, you know, but I do think that it's important to kind of name and recognize that sometimes is at play.
Right. But I think what you're also speaking to, though, in context with beneficial collaboration, that was prep. What you're saying essentially is that there is, and again, that's why we go back to that communication. There's so much prep that really goes into having a collaborative meeting.
Yeah.
I think one of the things I spend a lot of time, and I know you can speak to this too, is that I spend a lot of time like clarifying with my family, like what kind of IEP meeting is this? Especially if I'm first coming in, I haven't family, and they're like, well, I want to talk about all these things, and I want to request this, and I want to do this, and I want to do that. And I'm like, what IEP meeting is this? And a lot of times, again, because that's not family's area, they don't know. They don't know if this is an annual IEP meeting. They don't know if this is because last year I requested a speech eval and it was at the end of the year and we're starting the year and the speech eval is complete. So this is a review of that and to determine if they're eligible for the related service for speech. Like they don't know. And so we have to start with, on the advocate side of being like, I need you to clarify with them, you know, and you draft the email and whatever. And like, what meeting is this? And then the other side is I've had, not so much this year yet, but last year, I had a lot of meetings where because of the time constraints, and we'd sent this letter, and so they're getting into it and they're trying to speed up, as you've mentioned, because we have to do this and we have that and blah, blah, blah. And I've had to say, we've discussed we have a hard time of 250. It is already 230. We still have 5 more items to get through. So are we going to decide which items we are able to get through? Have we come to the conclusion that some staff can be dismissed? And so we can continue on the meeting and get through the remainder of the items and the parents are okay with this? Do we need to go ahead and stop and just go ahead and schedule a part 2? I have found myself as the advocate stepping in and doing that because I'm like, it is my responsibility, and I'm sure you feel this way as well, to make sure that my family's concerns are addressed.
Oh, yeah.
You knew ahead of time that this is what we wanted to discuss. And so I think when we talk about that collaboration piece, I think on the one hand, it is important for families to feel validated in bringing their concerns to the table. So part of the school team collaborating, I always say there's the school team, the home team, and they make up the IEP team.
That's correct.
And so for the school team, for the home team, they need to feel validated by the school team. They need to feel like their concerns matter, even if they're misunderstanding the situation or don't have all the information for the situation. Right. But I need to know that you hear my concern. For the school team, I think for collaboration to occur, a lot of times they need to just be asked what is taking place and what is happening. I think the part where I see the school team get the most defensive and where there's a struggle in collaborating with the families is when they feel like the families are coming in and saying, this is what you're doing. And if you can't pointing, like, this is what you're doing, like I'm scolding you, versus coming in and going, like Lisa said earlier, and that's something I do all the time too. Tell me about their day. you mentioned that you feel like this is not the right setting for them, because I get that a lot about gen ed not being the right setting. And I'm like, tell me what's happening. And a lot of times when they walk through what's happening, I'm seeing two key things. One is a lack of support in the gen ed setting. And the second thing is ableism. And it's not intentional ableism. It's
No.
that they have this compliance-based mindset and they don't understand the actual disability, and nobody has trained them on the disability. And
Right.
so the learner's not checking the compliance neurotypical box, and no one has taught them how to support them. So I think when there's that collaboration piece is brought up, I feel like the school team needs to be asked what they're doing and it's not assumed and told what they're doing.
That
And
is
I think
correct.
parents need to be validated in their concern because they don't know what's happening and they're not there.
Yeah, I'm like doing a dance inside. I am just so elated that you said that, because as part of this work, this advocacy work, it is essentially coaching parents, right? And that is one of the number one things that I coach parents in is you cannot show up at a meeting essentially accusing folks of doing stuff. Because you're going to put them on their heels before you start, and you don't necessarily know. You might have a great idea. You might be right. Right? 100%. But you are going to get so much further, and folks are going to be willing to work with you really differently if you come in with some sense of humility,
Right.
some sense of curiosity, an acknowledgement that they're one person and they have a classroom of however many learners and lots of moving parts, and the acknowledgement that what they see may look different in the school environment than what we may see at home, but like, I am here to partner with you and to better understand from your perspective. And sometimes, and this happens a lot, and every time it happens, it's a reminder for me. And this ties back to that episode 4 of the documentation piece. Sometimes things read like absolute garbage. And I read it and I go, oh crap. Like, there's some nonsense happening here. We have a whole lot to fix. And then we go in, and instead of saying, why in the hell are you doing blah, 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 we say, hey, walk us through. We know things are a little not so hotsy-totsy. Like, what does it kind of look like? How's it going? Help me help you, right? And then they explain what they're doing, and you're like, I couldn't have asked for anything better. But like, I just, right? So then it gives an opportunity to say, oh my gosh, okay, that sounds really good. And like, I'm just going to be fully transparent. That does not match this IEP. And we need to capture the goodness and shift some stuff around, right? The opposite of that is true too, right? Because sometimes you do hear the ableist garbage crap come out. And then it gives you an opportunity, even if you're saying that concerns me, or I don't like that, or whatever, you're not coming in making a presumption of what somebody is doing. You're allowing them to say what they're doing. And then instead of saying, like, please, dear God, don't do that, make it stop. Your brain might be thinking that. You get to say, okay, I think that worries me a little bit, and here's why. Right? So if it's like some kind of ableist, whatever, right? Like, so I'm thinking of a family where, God love the school, God bless. It is such a heavy PBIS and the points and the right?
We're probably going to so that.
Right. And so there's like, the teacher was using, this was last year, they were using the kids sat in groups. It was an elementary school classroom. Kids were in groups, and like, the group got a point or whatever if everyone brought in their homework.
That's bullshit.
It's such bullshit, right? And so this young person had an accommodation in their IEP that like they didn't have to, they wouldn't be penalized kind of thing. But it didn't matter because the group was being penalized and or it was like being made public, right?
Yeah, don't penalize me for other people's shit either.
Right. And so then it was like really exposing for this young learner, and it was just like, it was all shit. And I'm like, why do we have points for homework in second grade or whatever? Like, so, but it was an opportunity in the meeting to nicely say, we're hearing some angst about this. What does this kind of look like? We see that there's the accommodation for, how's it kind of playing out?
Right.
They got to have their moment in the sun to describe what was happening. And then it gave us an opportunity to say, okay, I think I understand from your perspective why you think you're accommodating this young person. Here are the pieces that still feel amiss and why this accommodation isn't actually landing as meaningful and removing a barrier. It's just creating a different barrier.
Right.
And so with this particular team, I don't know how much we've really moved the needle because we're still having a good time with them. But like, if nothing else, like my mom always talks about this, she's a retired teacher, that learning happens a lot of times in disequilibrium. You think you know something, you get some information that kind of causes you to go, huh? And then you think about it and marinate on it and like maybe shift and pivot. And so sometimes that collaboration is creating a little bit of a disequilibrium moment, respectfully, to be able to sit and wonder and think about something. And it lands really differently than coming in saying, why in the hell are you doing this in your classroom? And please make it stop. I'm asking nicely. I'm asking for a friend.
No, but what you're talking about is that piece that I think we're brought in as advocates for a lot of the time, because we can come in with the emotion removed, and then we do have the experience of navigating, these complicated situations, knowing there's different emotions on different sides of the table. But I think what you're also speaking to is the importance of nuance. Because it is important to give the benefit of the doubt. We do have to remember that, we are advocating for the needs of typically one learner, and they are navigating the needs of 20. And I think that, coming in with that understanding and not coming in, not coming in as I like to say an expert. Like if you see my social media posts, I would say I don't like the term expert. And that's come over the years, because a lot of times to me, expert implies that there's nothing left to be learned. There's nothing left to know. And I think that I've had more success coming into an IEP meeting and asking questions, getting inquisitive, and essentially just letting them know, like, I want to know, like, and I've come into some meetings where they're just like, it has been relayed to this parent that their child is a nightmare behaviorally, and it's just very disheartening to hear. And the parent is not going to come in there with that, like, let's talk about it, have a conversation. They're coming in there like, you are putting my child in this light that they are not, and I'm angry and I'm upset, as they should be. And so I come into that space and I'm like, okay, tell me more about what's happening. Tell me what you're actually seeing. I'm seeing this accommodation in their IEP, and you're saying that you don't feel like that is effective. And by the time we're done with the conversation, they're feeling heard a lot of the time for the first time. The staff is going like, oh, somebody's finally asking me questions and trying to understand my point of view and what I'm seeing. But then the parents also hearing where, oh, well, I see where to fix that, right? I see where they can be supported because I know my learner. And if something that, and then the team is able to go, oh, this is how that translates into accommodation. But you don't get those things if you're not having those conversations. You don't get those things if you're asking questions. And just to flip it a little bit too, the other side is where like parents, a big one this year has been getting a learner to school. And the school team is coming at it as if you just get them in the building, or if you were just disciplined enough, or you were parenting the right way. And just like we're saying that, parents, we want them to give the school team grace by asking questions. As the school team, you need to give the parent grace, because I promise you, if as somebody that has experienced, whether you call it school refusal, needs-based school avoidance, whatever title you give it, as someone who's experienced that with my learners, my own children, if you think that I am not up at night and I am not dreading in the morning
Of
trying
course.
to get them to the school setting, you have lost your freaking mind.
Right.
Because I understand the importance of education, and I understand the importance of them accessing it, and I understand the importance of them learning. And so I think for collaboration to really take place, there has to be listening, questions, and validation and understanding. If you can't do those four things, you are not going to have a collaborative setting, and you are not in prep. So 5 things.
Right.
If you can't do those 5 things, you are not going to have a collaborative meeting or a collaborative team.
No, and just like from the parent perspective, it can feel very procedural, like now we're going to do this and now we're going to do that, and we're kind of moving on from thing to thing. If you say, we're looking forward to having a collaborative meeting, and then you show up hurling accusations and talking over folks and not being willing to listen, then that lands equally poorly. Right? You're not showing up in a collaborative spirit, right? And it doesn't mean, I have sat in a lot of meetings. I'll just keep it to this year, where like history has been unkind. Right? There's a path that got us to the room that hasn't been fantastic.
Right.
And it is okay to name that path hasn't been great. And in some cases, it's been with the actual team sitting at the table. And in some cases, there's been a change from one school to another school site, or one like within a district. And I've had folks leave a district and come,
Right.
And I just say, we're not here to litigate the past.
Right.
But we do need to name the pain point of fill in the blank. Not feeling heard in this process. My child really being misunderstood and painted as a criminal, as, somebody who's manipulative, as, somebody who doesn't need support when they clearly do, because we're we're in burnout, right? Like, we've walked this path. We're not here to fight or argue or litigate that. We're here to try as best we humanly can to hit refresh and start over. And I have a situation, and I don't want to get too in the weeds because I don't want to breach confidentiality, but in one district, moved to a different district, all hell absolutely broke loose in that district. I was brought in and I'm like, we're hitting eject and going back to the other one, even though it wasn't great. You're not staying where you are. It was just beyond indescribable. And so, and the previous IEP was such a mess. I'm like, what? I don't even know what I'm reading. Right. And the parent it's California. So the parent had signed with partial consent, but it was it was a mess. And so, this new team knew she had an advocate. We came in, this and that. And at one point, I was asking some of these questions and saying, I am not here to throw neighboring district under the bus. I'm not here to make an accusation of anyone in the room. But there's a history of pain from this young person not being seen as a whole human. And so while we're granting, we're allowing for certain assessments to take place, like an FBA, and OT and all the things, we really have to have it be said that we can't just be looking at behavior through this criminalized or over-sexualized lens.
Mm-hmm.
So we're allowing for it, but we need to center this young person as the human being that they are. And so I swear to God, the program specialist, the previous district did all kinds of things. Like there was a behavior plan in the IEP and they'd never done an FBA, and they had done it without the parents' consent. Like it was a whole situation. I know. And the program specialist was like, with your permission, can we just erase that behavior plan? Can we just pull it out and throw it away and start fresh? Because, like, you didn't even consent to it. Are you okay with that? And the mom was like, yes, please. It's why I didn't sign the damn thing in the first place. It's because this garbage was in there. Right? So you just never know. But, like, you can name this hasn't worked. This has been hard. This was a rough start. Like, you can say what's hard, you can say what's not working, you can say what your pain point is without pushing folks back on their heels. And I think we did, I can't remember back that far. Well, tears gone. But I'm pretty sure we discussed this in the parent inputs episode of like, that's part of this front loading of the communication is naming it out loud so that gives folks a chance to prepare. You're not coming in like, you know, fires and batons and, you know, you're just saying, hey, let's restart in a meaningful way.
No, absolutely. And I think one of the things, just kind of referencing back to our first episode, about why we do what we do. And every year when I hold my son's IEP meeting, my oldest son's IEP meeting, I tell them where we've come from. And I tell them essentially why I became an advocate, what we experienced and what he endured. And I make it very clear I will not go back.
Oh, yeah.
And my reasoning for that is because I want them to understand that I can be your biggest asset. We can be collaborative, communicate. I tell them, like, if there's an issue, please let me know. I want to have conversations. I want to work to support. Now that we've been in the district we're in for 2 years, the previous staff is like, oh, yeah, definitely. Parents are very involved, very supportive. Like we have that connection, that relationship, that dynamic. And I'm like, or I can be your biggest headache. And it's just me being honest. And that's something that I make abundantly clear because I'm like, I don't want to go above you, but I will because of what I've endured. And so when we look at that communication and collaboration piece, and centering the learner, I think for me, I have found as a parent, when I give the background of my son's story and they're sitting across from the table and they're looking at me, the shock on their face,
sure,
endured. And like having met him at this point, because this meeting is not at the start of the year, it's not the very beginning, it's not day one. So now they've had like a week or two to interact and engage with him. And they're like, what? Like, I can't imagine. And I'm like, and I do that intentionally. And it's intentional because I want you to see how he was treated and perceived. And you know that contrasts with what you have seen and who you have met. And so I think that collaboration piece in that communication, and again, like we go back to centering the learner, remembering that this is not a insert autistic child on an IEP, insert cerebral palsy child on an IEP, insert ADHD child on an IEP,
right.
Insert on an IEP.
Right.
This is Destiny's IEP. These are services and supports and accommodations for Destiny.
This is correct.
Barriers for Destiny. You have to really look at the learner. And sometimes the compliance part and checking the boxes forgets that there's an actual disabled learner that will be impacted by the safety and support and connection that you provide them.
Yep. Absolutely. Couldn't have said it better myself.
So I think this has probably been one of my favorite episodes because I think that we really got to get into the importance of that collaboration and provide real examples and practical ways to implement that in understanding with the always overlying theme of being neuroaffirming.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Yay.
Well, again, guys, if you haven't, please check out our other episodes. Like we mentioned, and we'll always reference episodes within. We have talked about parent input at this point. We've talked about bias at the IEP table. We've talked about the importance of documentation. Our very first episode gets into why me and Lisa do this, why we became advocates. We talked about the current administration and how to resist by being neuroaffirming in episode 5. So, please check out all those episodes. We also have a great one if you're just needing an emotional piece, you're just needing to kind of check in and feel supported from the standpoint of that parent guilt and that emotional weight of advocacy. It was our episode prior to this one. But you can find us on Apple, Spotify, and YouTube. And thanks for joining us on The Village.
Yeah, we'll see you next time.
Thank you again for joining us here in the Affirming Village. We're your co-hosts, Dr. Destiny Huff and Lisa Baskin-Wright. And we hope today's conversation leaves you feeling seen, supported, and better equipped to advocate for yourself or your learner. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share this with someone else in the village. Until next time, keep advocating, keep affirming, and keep building the village we all deserve.